Welcome back, everybody. We're breaking down UFC 273, Volkanovski versus the Korean Zombie, and we have a super stacked main card here, and the rest of the card is looking pretty solid as well. There are a couple prospects that I think people want to keep an eye on here. Ian Garry, pretty hot prospect. Dricus du Plessis, another very exciting fighter, could potentially make some waves in the division here. And we also have the debut of Piera Rodriguez, kind of flying under the radar a little bit, but I do think that she's got a bit of potential in the women's strawweight division. But yeah, overall a pretty solid card, but I'll be honest, there's really only 3 fights that I care about on this card, and I think we all know which fights those are. Not to say that these other fights are bad or anything, but those are the 3 fights that need to happen. But of course, we'll be breaking down the full card. But before we do have to review the previous card real quick. And overall, it wasn't too bad of a night for me. The picks were, pretty on point, honestly, but the bets weren't. Ended up dropping about a unit on the night. Some pretty bad spots that I probably could have avoided. But first fight on the card, we had Luis Saldana, Bruno Souza. So started the night off good there. I picked Saldana to win, also bet him as well. Was tempted to add a little more to him as the line had flipped. He'd become an underdog by the time the fight had started. But decided against it because at the end of the day, Saldana is a gasser, a known gasser, and don't want to have too much exposure to him. But it was a pretty close fight. Probably shouldn't have bet him at chalk. Was pleasantly surprised to see him win that third round. But Saldana is someone that I'll probably fade going forward. The cardio is just really not it for him. Mateus Nicolau, David Dvorak. Didn't bet this fight. Did pick Nicolau to win. And I actually missed the first half of this fight. Literally tuned back in right before the knockdown, which pretty crazy. But from my understanding, that first round was really close. But that's just generally how these guys fight, which is why I didn't really get invested in this fight. But moving forward, Jennifer Maia, Manon Fiorot, and I ended up parlaying Fiorot and playing the over in this fight as well in 2 separate parlays. Thought about taking the decision prop as well, but decided against it because I already had her tied up in a couple parlays, so I already had a decent amount of units invested in this fight. But yeah, Fiorot was able to just do work in this fight. Maia's just a little too slow, too plotty at this point for Fiorot. Fiorot landed much more frequently the bigger shots. Very clear decision for Fiorot there. Moving along, Ali Askarov, Kizriev, Denis Tululin. I took a small poke on Kizriev by decision. I did say that if he got out of that first round, it could get a little dicey. Could be a little close, but it looked like Kizriev was still pretty damn fresh in there, while Denis was starting to fatigue a little bit. And, he did hit him with a pretty slick submission there. But yeah, it was just a small poke. But moving along, Chris Gutierrez, Danaa Bakkarel. Didn't really have much invested in this fight. Don't think I had the best read on it and wasn't super confident. And I think this was one of my poorer reads on the card, I guess, because I did pick Bakkarel to win. And of course, he gets hit with a spinning back elbow or back fist, but would have been really interesting to see how the scorecards would have went because, Bakkarel, he was swinging big, but he was missing a lot. It was getting blocked by Gutierrez, but Gutierrez did a really good job of, moving on the outside, really working the kicks. So it's hard to say, I think had it have gone to the cards, it probably would have been Gutierrez. But anyways, we move along, Sarah McMahon versus Carol Rosa. And yeah, I did end up taking a small shot on McMahon by decision. Kind of hedged it a little bit with Rosa by submission and Rosa to win in round 3 because, McMahon has been known to pull these stunts before. But overall, wasn't too surprised with the performance. We do know that McMahon is a very strong wrestler. She is someone that is, very experienced in there. The only concern was, if she was just going to basically choke, right? Because, she's had a pretty bad history of doing that. But, Rosa, we did have concerns about her defensive grappling. So it's definitely going to get tested in this fight. However, I wasn't overly confident in McMahon to pull it off there. So only went a quarter of a unit. But moving along, Mark DeCasey, Vyacheslav Borshev. Had Borshev parlayed small. I thought he'd be able to get it done on the feet. Pretty bad read in this fight. Probably the worst read on the card. I didn't think DeCasey would have as much success wrestling and grappling as he did. I didn't really think that DeCasey was really that good of a wrestler or a grappler. But I think what really made just a massive difference here was the size, the physicality, and the cardio, because DeCasey showed he could do that for all 3 rounds, whereas Borshev pretty much tired himself out after that first round defending the wrestling and the grappling. So overall, not a great read here, but not a fight I was overly confident in, which is why I only went about a unit on Borshev. But we move along. Neil Magny, Max Griffin. So this was my biggest bet of the night was on Magny. Max bet him in this spot, and boy, was it a sweat, because that first round he definitely dropped unanimously, and he really didn't start picking it up until like midway through the second round. It was enough to win him that round, but it was by a very thin margin. Honestly, the round 3 Magny that showed up was the Magny that I had expected to show up for all 3 rounds. Maybe he starts a little slow in that first round and gets it going in that second round. But with how slow he started that second round, it was definitely a pretty big concern. And definitely not a great bet in hindsight, but he did pull off the win. Did show some, veteran savviness there. He ended that second round very strong. I did think he landed some of the bigger shots, had some of the bigger moments, and overall put a stamp a little harder on that second round than Griffin did. And of course, that third round was very dominant by Magny as well. But moving forward, Askarov, Kai Kara France. I did end up parlaying Askarov. Unfortunately, he did lose the decision here in this fight. Very impressed with the takedown defense and the cardio of Kai Kara France in this fight. I thought Askarov would be able to get at least 2 rounds of good solid wrestling and control time in. But, Kai Kara France did a great job defending and, had good enough cardio to the point where he was still able to put together some really nice shots against Askarov. Very impressed by Kai Kara France here. Obviously, not a great bet there either, because Askarov was a pretty heavy favorite in that fight. Matt Brown, Brian Barberena. And I did have a very small poke on Barberena by knockout, and also Barberena to win in round 3. Figured we'd see Brown start to slow down in that fight, and then we start to see the cardio and the pace of Barberena pick up and likely get the finish, likely later in the fight. Matt Brown showing a lot of toughness and heart in that fight, fighting in front of his crowd, so definitely was a little more motivated in there probably. Whereas Barberena, I just don't think he's got that in him anymore. He still is a very tough fighter, very skilled fighter in there, but I don't think he's got the finishing instinct, to really close out fights like he used to. So a little concerning there, but the guy is still able to put on some really fun fights. Moving along, Joanne Wood, Alexa Grasso, ended up parlaying Grasso and then the over in this fight in separate parlays. So the Grasso money line hit, but the over did not. Obviously, kind of expected this fight to play out on the feet. That it'd be a striking affair. Grasso, not really a submission threat, but I guess if you're going up against Joanne Calderwood these days, everyone's a submission threat. So did not take that into account enough beforehand, obviously, and kind of screwed me over here because I think I had a decent amount tied up in the over as well. But it is what it is, and we move along. Curtis Blades, Chris Daukaus. I think I had Blades parlayed with Askarov, with Askarov. That obviously didn't cash, and then I had the under in this fight parlayed with the over in the Grasso fight, which sucks that didn't cash either. But back to this fight, Blades, the stand-up looked good for him. Really good to see him really progress that part of his game. Definitely some concern on the Daukaus side in terms of letting his chin recover. He got knocked out not too long ago and is making his way back into this fight. Probably still a little bit compromised. I don't know if that same shot from Curtis would have had as big of an effect had, he'd taken a little more time to recover, or if he had not taken so much damage in the Lewis fight. Overall, solid performance by Blades. Would like to see Daukaus maybe take a little time off, because at the end of the day, he's still somewhat young in his career and could probably afford to take some time off, especially since he's going to be going up against a bunch of other heavy hitters as well going forward. But pretty solid card overall. Betting wise, did drop a unit on the card, but obviously looking to bounce back here. We have a pretty big stack card, so plenty of opportunities to make some money here, and getting this out a little early, hopefully, so we could hit some of those early lines before the general betting public comes in and just steams these lines to high heaven here, because some of those lines from last week got absolutely crushed, like Kizriev minus 1,000 by closing. Pretty crazy stuff. So if you want any value in your parlays, you better make them soon. But yeah, without further ado, let's get right into this card. And in the first fight of the card, at least according to Tapology, I'm not even sure if this is going to be the first fight, but it's a short notice fight between Aspen Ladd and Raquel Pennington. Pennington is the one coming in short notice this fight. originally slated to go up against Lad was Aldana, but I think she got an injury or something, so Pennington is stepping in to fight Lad on 2 weeks' notice, and no odds on this fight just yet. This fight literally just got announced here, but we'll take a look at Lad first. So, with Lad, she is primarily a grappler. She's got pretty decent topside grappling, but the issue is she doesn't seem to have the most urgency getting the fight there sometimes. But when she does get it there, she's very aggressive there, very ferocious, likes to flurry on opponents, make noise and everything. And, just wail on opponents, look to get them out of there. However, she does seem to struggle a bit when she isn't able to get the fight to the ground. Her striking, I think, is pretty limited. She doesn't seem too comfortable there. And if she isn't able to hit takedowns, get some top control time, she does seem a little lost out there. And, she starts taking damage. And when that happens, I feel like, her takedowns, her entries do become a little more telegraphed, a little more desperate, and they become a little less effective. And while she is pretty dangerous on top, I just don't think she's really had too much success, with the grappling against higher level fighters. Even in the Kunitskaya fight, it was a very, very close fight until she ended up catching her with, I believe, a cross. And then before that, it was against Eubanks, who is a notorious gasser and is essentially a 500 fighter at this point. And she's going to be going up against Pennington here, who is a veteran at this point. Pennington, a very well-rounded fighter. She's got, pretty serviceable boxing. And, for the sake of this matchup, I do think she's going to be the better striker here. Pennington, she, is very strong in the clinch as well. She likes to hold opponents up against the cage, dirty box with them a little bit. We have seen Pennington, hit takedowns before as well. Not a prolific wrestler by any means, but is someone who could definitely hit takedowns. But look, overall, Pennington's just a very tough, very well-rounded fighter. And there are definitely going to be concerns, coming in short notice and all. But, I don't think she's going to be out of shape here. She's probably, in the gym still. She's probably training with Tecia, probably getting that cardio in, if you know what I'm saying. But in all seriousness, I do think Pennington's going to come in here pretty good shape. I don't think she's just going to gas out, although there definitely are concerns, especially if this is going to be a grappling heavy fight. And coming in short notice, do you have to wonder, how the grappling cardio is going to hold up, because there is a difference between, coming in shape and coming in, in fight shape. And, I don't know if 2 weeks is going to be enough for Pennington to be in, great fight shape. But, it's a bit of speculation here. Pennington, she has been in there a number of times. She kind of knows the drill already. But, if this fight does get extended, in the grappling, come that second and third round, it might get a little dicey. But, on the feet, if it's a striking affair, I do favor Pennington. It's just that, if this fight's going to get, grimy in there, I don't know how Pennington's going to hold up. Because, with Lad, she has shown that she could pick it up later in fights. She's shown, pretty solid cardio as well. Even though she does tend to look like shit on the scales, she has gone the distance, and she has shown she could, pour it on as the fight progresses. So a little concern on that part. But as far as how they do match up, I do think that Pennington should be able to hold her own in that first round and a half. But I do think that this fight could potentially get a little dicey as it gets extended. But ultimately, I got to go with Pennington here. She's far more experienced, far more well-rounded. I like her striking a bit more. I think that she should be able to stuff the takedowns of Lad. Again, Pennington's a pretty big, strong fighter herself. She could potentially get a bit of clinch control time, maybe hit some takedowns of her own. We just haven't really seen Pennington get beat by too many fighters dominantly, that aren't like, very high-level elite fighters. So I don't know if Lad's going to be able to pull it off here. She's going to have to come on strong later in the fight, but I think we see Pennington put on a strong, 2-round performance and then maybe just survive that last round against Lad. So give me Pennington here. Give me Pennington by decision. But as far as how I'd line the fight, probably put Pennington at around like maybe minus 180 or so. Nothing too crazy. I do think she should be favored to win. But the short notice nature of it does have me a little concerned. Might just play her decision prop, get slight plus money on it, but maybe nothing crazy here. I'd have to look into it a little bit more. But the short notice nature of it does have me a tad concerned. But outside of that, I do think that Pennington should be able to pull off the decision here. Moving along, we have Dricus du Plessis versus Anthony Hernandez, and du Plessis is the minus 160 favorite. Comeback on Hernandez is plus 140. And this should be a pretty fun, exciting fight for as long as it lasts. We'll start with du Plessis, who honestly I have a tough time getting a great read on because I feel like his striking is, pretty awkward. It's pretty wonky in there. He does look a little stiff at times, and, he is pretty herky-jerky with his movement, and, it even looks like some of his strikes that he throws is kind of throwing him off balance, but he still is able to pull off a lot of these wins. He gets it done some way, somehow. And at the end of the day, that's really all that matters. It kind of reminds me of, this is going to be a pretty weird reference, but Sean Marion, back in the day, basketball player, very weird jump shot, and he's making it work, and that's kind of how I feel with du Plessis at this point. The guy's got just a very weird striking style in there, but he's somehow able to make it work. I think maybe it's because of all that weird herky-jerky sort of movement. It kind of throws his opponents off. They're not able to really get their timing down. He kind of lulls him into, I guess, just a weird sense of security, and he's able to eventually catch him. But regardless, he's made it work so far, so, I can't really criticize him too much for that. From what I have seen on the tape, he does seem to have a very heavy leg kick that he's pretty consistent with throwing. He'll go to it, pretty frequently. He's got good power as well. He does seem to have a bit of wrestling as well. I don't know if it's a big part of his game, but I have seen him shoot some takedowns in there. And, on top of that, he's fought some pretty good guys on the regionals. He's only had 2 losses so far. One is to Soldic, who, he actually knocked out as well. So they're technically, they're 1-1. And, Soldic is a pretty legit fighter. Is probably going to be in the UFC pretty soon here. But overall, du Plessis, pretty weird fighter, but somehow it works for him. And, again, at the end of the day, that's really all that matters. He's going to be going up against Anthony Hernandez, making his return coming off of that big upset over Rodolfo Vieira, where Vieira essentially just gassed out after that first round, hunting that submission. And, kind of irrelevant for this fight, but it is a pretty interesting tidbit of information here. But Hernandez, more of a striker in there. The guy's got pretty slick boxing, pretty quick hands, good movement. He does a much better job of just flowing in there, I think, much better than du Plessis. And with Hernandez, he is very very aggressive. He likes to back opponents down, just flurry on them. He has shown that. He's got decent grappling as well. Obviously he submitted Vieira, gassed Vieira, I want to say, but he still survived that first round, defended the submission attempts pretty well in that first round. So, pretty good look for him there. And on top of that, he does have a couple submission wins against, UFC level guys. He got Jun Young Park with an anaconda choke, and he does have a number of guillotines on the regionals as well. And, he did also have a decision win over Brendan Allen on the regionals. So, I do think the guy's a decent grappler in there at least, and, I feel people kind of meme Hernandez a little bit. He's got some pretty meme losses, but I don't think he's a bad fighter at all, especially early in the fight. When he starts aggressive, I think he's actually pretty dangerous in that first round. But I will say this, Hernandez does tend to slow down a bit in fights. He does start pretty aggressively. However, he's shown pretty good heart, in the Park fight. Things were starting to get away from him. Park was doing a bit of damage, but he was able to gut it out and eventually pull off the anaconda choke. And, he was going for takedowns in that fight as well. But taking a look at this matchup, it's a pretty volatile fight, in my opinion. Both guys, I think, have a lot of finishing upside, and I think both guys have been hurt, have been knocked out before. So I think this is a fight that likely ends inside the distance. But, early I do favor Hernandez. He does start very aggressively, very strong. And I could see Hernandez having a good amount of success early. I do think that Hernandez is a pretty dangerous fighter in that first round, whether he's looking for that guillotine or whether he's just looking to strike with his opponents. I do think he can get the finish early. And, du Plessis, again, he's been hurt. He's been pressured and rocked before. So Hernandez does have a shot early. And, du Plessis definitely is going to have to weather that early storm. And if he is able to do that, I can see him potentially getting the finish come that, second, maybe even third round. Because I do think that if he's able to survive that first round, we see du Plessis, the leg kicks start to add up. He does really good attritional damage with them. We start to see, Hernandez slow down a bit just naturally because, he tends to do that in most of his fights, especially with how aggressively he starts. And then, we might see the mobility start to get limited from the leg kicks. And eventually we see du Plessis maybe catch him. Maybe Hernandez is going to have a tough time getting his reads in on du Plessis. And, again, du Plessis does have just very weird movement in there. And maybe Hernandez isn't able to crack the code in there. And we see du Plessis eventually, find the knockout shot on Hernandez. But as far as an official pick for this fight, I think I got to go with du Plessis here. Not super confident because, again, I don't have the greatest read on the guy, but I do think that his style has worked for him so far. So, I just got to go with the results here. But I think the better play might just be the violence here. I think this fight likely ends inside the distance. Whether it's Hernandez early or Du Plessis a little later, I think that we get the finish, or we see a finish. And honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if Du Plessis gets the finish early as well. The guy's just a wild man in there. So official pick for me is going to be Du Plessis, round 2, knockout. Low confidence, but I think the play I really like is just fight doesn't go. Might look to just parlay that. And moving along, we have a heavyweight bout between Marcin Tybura and Jairzinho Rozenstruik. And Rozenstruik's the minus 130 favorite. Come back on Tybura is plus 110. And we'll start with Tybura here, who is a bit of a generalist. The guy's striking is serviceable, and, he is content to strike in a lot of situations, actually, even when he is a bit outgunned, in fights like the Volkov fight where he's a bit outmatched technically, and then in the Hardy and Harris fights where they do have a power advantage over him. They're a little more explosive, but he is content to still stand and trade with them, in terms of like the striking. So Tybura, he is pretty confident in his hands, but of course he does have the wrestling and the grappling he can mix in. And overall, I do feel that he's had the most success when he's really able to mix it all together. Because in the Harris and even the Hardy fight, it was really the wrestling and the grappling that kind of saved him there, because he was getting hurt on the feet against him. He was getting rocked, but he was able to get them down and grind him out, pound him out. However, the issue with Tybura is he's actually not that aggressive of a wrestler. He will pursue takedowns sometimes, but he's more of like an opportunistic takedown artist where, he's not actively setting up takedowns a lot of the time or even looking to chain wrestle. He's looking to maybe catch a kick. His opponent's overswinging and he's able to duck under for a takedown. That's more of Tybura's thing. He will occasionally pursue takedowns, but I just don't think that overall he's a very aggressive wrestler in there. And in this fight, I do think that he's going to have to be a little more proactive with it, because he's going to be going up against Rozenstruik, who, the guy's a very big puncher there. He's more of a counter puncher, but, he does have, pretty good timing in there. Very big power, obviously, but I think we all kind of know the issue with Rozenstruik. It's that, he's very low volume. He's content to just sit back and look for that opening to time that perfect shot of his. And it does lead to pretty large moments of inactivity. And, that is something I kind of wanted to address in this fight as well, because, while that is true, I'm not denying it. You kind of have to look at these fights individually, these fights that he's losing minutes in. So I guess the first fight that he really was kind of dropping minutes in was the Overeem fight, where Overeem was actually taking him down the first 3 rounds, had a bit of success there. But, come that 4th round, we saw Rozenstruik actually pick it up and have a lot of success when he was moving forward. And eventually, he did get the knockout in that 5th round. And the next fight that had happened in was the Gall fight. So, I can kind of give him a bit of a pass there, because Gall, very technical guy, was able to just completely shut down the offense of Rozenstruik. And then most recently, the Blades fight, where, Blades is just dominant enough wrestler. He was able to take Rozenstruik down, and Rozenstruik wasn't able to get up. So obviously, I'm not saying that Rozenstruik's not low volume or anything, but I did want to contextualize it a little bit in those fights. And for this matchup, I do feel that his style may work pretty well against Tybura. Tybura is someone I feel struggles with pressure. He struggles with fighters that are able to counter him. And Rozenstruik, I do think, is someone who could do both, right? Because we saw in the fight with Tybura, against Hardy and Harris, they were able to pressure him, and they did give him trouble on the feet, when they were able to kind of blitz in and land some heavy shots. Rozenstruik, in my opinion, is a far more technical striker than both those guys. I think he hits harder as well, and I think most importantly, he doesn't gas out like Harris. He doesn't gas out like Hardy. We've seen Rozenstruik, his power carry through fights. We've seen him get knockouts in the 1st round. We've seen him get knockouts in the 2nd round, and we've also seen him get a knockout in the 5th round as well. So he is someone who I think can get a knockout at any time during the fight. Whereas with Hardy and more recently Harris, these guys kind of fall off a cliff after that 1st round. And secondly, we have seen guys like Sakai and Abdurakhimov have success just looking to counter Tybura, and Rozenstruik can do that as well. Rozenstruik's got, really good timing in his counters. and he does have pretty good shot selection as well. So I do feel that anytime they exchange, I think that Rozenstruik is going to be live for a knockout. So I kind of expect Tybura to look to get this fight to the ground, where Rozenstruik's weak there. The guy's just got a very poor get-up game. Overeem was able to hold him down. Blades was able to hold him down. Granted, Blades, I think, a much better wrestler. But, seeing Rozenstruik, or seeing Overeem have that much success on top of Rozenstruik is, very troubling. But I just think that, for Tybura to get into those situations, he's going to have to close the distance. He's going to have to get his hands on Rozenstruik, and he's going to have to take him down, which, I think that when he does look to engage, I think Rozenstruik's going to be able to find the knockout. I really do think that Rozenstruik's going to be able to catch Tybura coming in, whether it's in a striking exchange or whether it's Tybura looking to come in shooting the takedown. So I think Rozenstruik gets it done here. I think Rozenstruik gets it done by knockout. We could potentially see Tybura have a bit of grappling success early in the fight. He could definitely grind out the rest of the round if he's able to take Rozenstruik down, but I just don't know if he's going to be able to do it for 3 consecutive rounds. The fights always start standing, and so I think that Rozenstruik's going to have plenty of opportunities between each round and the beginning of the first round to find that knockout. Even if he does get taken down early in the fight. So I got Rozenstruik here. I think he gets it done by knockout. I don't know which round it's going to happen in, but I have a pretty good feeling it's going to happen here. So give me Rozenstruik. Give me Rozenstruik by knockout. And moving along into the next fight, we have Piera Rodriguez versus K. Hansen, and Hansen's the -160 favorite. Come back on. Rodriguez is +140, and I think this is a pretty straightforward breakdown. We have your prototypical grappler versus striker, and we'll start with the striker and Rodriguez first. So Rodriguez, she is making her UFC debut, and first thing I noticed when watching tape on her is she's just got very heavy hands, and before getting into the tape, I thought this was going to be a bit of a slog. Usually with women's MMA, it's kind of like that, but I was very impressed with what I saw from Rodriguez. She's got a good mix of pressure and composure in there. Not the highest volume, but she does seem to pack quite a bit of power with her shots. She's shown pretty good cardio as well. She's gone the distance in a number of fights, and she does have a late 5th round finish as well. And she does actually push a decent pace in there as well, right? So it's not like, she's just, super passive in there. And honestly, it's a tad suspect, the power and the cardio and all. But, she has shown that she can hit some offensive takedowns as well. So pretty solid prospect, in my opinion, with Rodriguez. But, there definitely are still some questions around her. Primarily, the takedown defense and the get-ups. We haven't really seen that too much from her. We haven't seen too many opponents threaten that, from her. On the regionals as well. So a big question mark there, especially coming into this matchup against Hansen, who is a pretty aggressive grappler. And, the other concern, of course, is that Rodriguez really hasn't fought anybody of note. She's really only fought 2, semi-decent opponents in Goatsik and that chick from the Contender Series. But she's going to be going up against Hansen, who, again, is a pretty solid grappler. Her stand-up really isn't good, though. She's kind of plotty. She's a bit stiff, and overall is pretty hittable. She's without a doubt going to get murked if this is a stand-up fight. But with Hansen, she's a pretty committed grappler. She's got a pretty wide array of takedowns. I've seen her shoot a double leg. A little sloppy, but it does get the job done. She's got a few nice trips as well. She will go for the head and arm throw also. And when she's on top of opponents, she is pretty active with the ground and pound, and she will look for submissions as well. And overall, she does a pretty decent job of fighting to her win condition. She knows what she has to do in there. She's not going to mess around on the feet too much. But the issue that I kind of have with her is she's fought girls that don't have the best grappling defense. And she hasn't really fought anyone that's been able to really make her pay on the feet. And when it's standing, I do think that this is going to be a very tough matchup for Hansen. She's definitely going to have to lean very heavily on the grappling. But, I don't know how good or how bad Rodriguez's defensive grappling really is. It's just a big question mark there. I did a bit of digging, and it looks like Rodriguez, she's a blue belt, but if I remember correctly, Hansen's also a purple belt. So I just don't know how much stock you could really put into that. And, we just haven't seen really any footage on the defensive grappling for Rodriguez. So we're kind of playing into the unknown here a little bit, but I will say this, though. What we do know is Rodriguez is the better striker, and by a pretty decent margin. I'm not really sure if that's even debatable. I'd be really surprised if Hansen was able to win in the striking exchanges. But, if Rodriguez is even somewhat decent, with the takedown defense and the get-ups, I think it's going to be a very, very tough fight for Hansen. And, if you're betting Hansen here or picking Hansen, you're kind of banking on Rodriguez just having, pretty subpar takedown defense. Her just being, a complete, fish out of water off her back. So that definitely could be the case, but, I don't know if I really want to pay the juice to find out. And, something that I do want to note is Rodriguez, I believe she is training at Black House with, fighters like Dern and Ricci, who are, pretty decent. Well, Ricci pretty decent, and Dern definitely a high-level grappler. But, she's in there with some other solid UFC fighters. So a really solid room she's training in. Obviously, that doesn't mean she's guaranteed to have great takedown defense or anything, but, she'll probably be getting some pretty good looks in there, some good tips. And overall, it is a good sign, even if it doesn't necessarily mean she'll have, fantastic takedown defense. And I'll also say this as well, and I'll probably get a bit of hate from the Hansen stands, but I just don't know if Hansen's really about that life. Like, I get some big Paige Van Zandt vibe from her. And seriously, I'm not even trying to hate, because she's probably making more money with her side hustle than she is with the UFC. So, at the end of the day, you gotta get the bag. But I don't know if I really want to get invested, at least from a betting perspective. Might still get invested some other way. But in all seriousness, dialing back here a little bit, Hansen does have a pretty legit path to victory with the wrestling and the grappling. However, I just can't really trust Hansen, even at moderate juice, to get it done. Because the issue that I kind of have with Hansen is, she can find the finish here, but if she doesn't, I do think the fight is going to be moderately close. We've seen in a number of her fights where she isn't able to get the finish, it does end up becoming a very close decision. The McKenna fight, whether or not you agree with the decision, was still a pretty close fight. And in the Jinyu Fry fight, she did get the finish late in the third round, but those first two rounds were really close. And if she didn't get the finish in that fight, she probably would have lost that fight. And then, even on the regionals on Invicta against Magdalena Samova, another very close fight, a fight that she lost in a split decision. So, I just can't really trust Kay Hansen if a fight does go to a decision here. And if the defensive grappling of Rodriguez holds up here, I think she could look like a moderate favorite. Because if you think about it, Hansen, even if she's able to get maybe 7 or 8 minutes of control time in this fight, I think that the remaining time on the feet is still going to be enough for Rodriguez to be able to do enough damage to potentially pull away with a pretty close decision. So I got to go with Rodriguez in this spot. I am taking a small leap of faith here. But yeah, I honestly don't mind a small poke on her at plus money here. So the pick for me is going to be Rodriguez. I think she's going to be able to keep it standing long enough to do enough damage and eke out a close decision here. So give me Rodriguez by decision. And moving along, we have Vinc Pichel versus Mark Madsen, and Pichel's the minus 145 favorite. Come back on Madsen is plus 125, and we'll start with the underdog in Madsen first. So Madsen, he's a very high-level wrestler, was an Olympic medalist, and, you definitely do see it in his fights. The guy's very strong, very explosive with his takedowns, but, he is a bit one-dimensional in that regard. His striking really isn't that great. It's a bit stiff and kind of basic overall. Was somehow able to outstrike Guida, but, in hindsight, wasn't really all that surprising. Guida, not exactly the most threatening striker in there, and Madsen was somehow able to, I guess, land some of the heavier strikes. Was pretty controversial. I think a lot of people scored it for Guida as well. But overall, Madsen is somewhat reliable to go to the wrestling. Outside of that Guida fight, he's generally looked to wrestle, get his opponents to the ground, either pound him out or, work a submission. But, I honestly don't think that his grappling is really that great. He's able to go out there and smash some lower level guys. But overall, I do think he's a bit of a grinder now that he's gotten to the UFC level. Guys are a little bit better at defending and, defending the takedowns and the submissions and the ground and pound and stuff. So he's kind of had to resort to just kind of hanging off his opponents in like the Hubbard fight. And we did see in that fight, he gassed out pretty hard. After about like the first round and a half, we did start to see Hubbard start to be able to tee off on him just because Madsen was slowing down so much. But something I will say about that fight, which, some people tend to overlook, is that at the end of the day, Madsen did win 2 out of 3 rounds. His wrestling and conditioning was good enough for him to grind on Hubbard for 2 rounds, 2 out of 3 rounds, and let him win unanimous decision there. So that's something that could definitely happen this fight, right? Because at the end of the day, Madsen is or was a very high-level Olympic caliber wrestler. So the guy's a phenomenal athlete with a phenomenal skill set, and that can get you pretty far in MMA, especially at like the lower levels. But, I do think he's taken a decent step up in competition here in Pichel, because Pichel, in my opinion, I think is a pretty underrated fighter. He's extremely well-rounded. The guy's got really good striking, good wrestling, good grappling. The guy overall is just, very comfortable everywhere. He's fought some pretty decent guys in there as well. And, even at 39, the guy's shown pretty good cardio. Really the only concern is that he is getting a little bit old. He's 39. He's somewhat inactive. He's been a little more active recently, but throughout most of his career, he only fights once a year or so. But on the other hand, Madsen is getting a little up there as well. He's only about a couple years younger than Pichel. And as far as MMA goes, Pichel has shown just much better cardio. But, taking a look at this matchup, I definitely think that this is a pretty winnable matchup for Pichel. For one, I just think that Pichel is like a better version of Hubbard. And I'm kind of putting it a little loosely here. They're pretty different fighters, but in terms of, what they bring to the table, I think he can offer what Hubbard did, but maybe a little more as well, right? Because for one, Pichel did actually beat Hubbard more recently. Both guys fought Hubbard, but I thought Pichel beat Hubbard much more convincingly, looked a lot better in his fight, and arguably, he fought a better version of Hubbard as well. And I do think that this fight can play out somewhat similarly to the Madsen-Hubbard fight, where, we see Madsen really work the wrestling early in the fight. He was able to get a good amount of control time in that fight, but I just think that Pichel's got better takedown defense, better defensive grappling, and Pichel is also going to be the better striker as well. So he's going to offer a lot more resistance to Madsen here. So I think that, for sure he's going to win the 3rd round. I think his cardio is much better, and I do think that Pichel is going to be good enough to win one of the 2 rounds, one of the first 2 rounds. I think maybe the 2nd round most likely, because we may see Madsen go to the wrestling early, and it's going to be hard to look against an Olympic level wrestler early in the fight. The guy is still very strong, very explosive, and he's still very skilled. But I do think that Pichel's going to do a much better job defending than Hubbard. He's going to make Madsen work a lot harder in that 1st round, and come that 2nd round, I think he's going to have much more success with the striking, and then in the 3rd round, I think that he could potentially even get the stoppage or win that round very dominantly to win at least 2 of the 3 rounds. So I like Pichel in this spot. I think he's the more well-rounded fighter. He's got better cardio. He's fought better guys in there, and he's looked solid overall. So I do like Pichel quite a bit. Obviously, there are some concerns, especially as he's getting a bit older, but he hasn't really shown too much wear and tear, too much decline in his performances. And of course, Madsen, again, is a very high-level wrestler. I can't state that enough here. There's a chance, he is able to get enough control time those first 2 rounds to win a very hairy decision. But I don't think he's going to be able to do what he did against Hubbard to Pichel here. Pichel's just the better fighter, so I got to go with Pichel here. I think he wins rounds 2 and 3, maybe even gets the late stoppage, but I got to go with Pichel here. And in the next fight, we have Ian Garry versus Darian Weeks. And Gary's the minus 260 favorite. Come back on Weeks is plus 220. And we'll start with Garry first. So Garry, he is a pretty hot prospect. Definitely riding a bit of hype going into this fight, and I can understand why. The guy's got a pretty good frame for the division. He's quite athletic. He's shown a very well-rounded skill set as well. His striking is solid. He's got a nice jab, fights behind it very well. He's got a pretty heavy leg kick also, and he does like to look for that head kick also. He's got a couple of knockouts with that head kick. He's shown a pretty solid grappling game as well. He defended very well against a veteran in Jack Rant and was able to work his way back up in a lot of the spots. And he has shown that he's got a pretty good top game as well when he's able to take his opponents down. But something I do want to touch on real quick on the Grant fight, it's definitely his best win for sure. And I want to preface this by saying that I'm not trying to discredit that win at all for him, because, Grant, he is a very solid regional vet. And overall, it was a very good performance by Garry. But Grant kind of gassed out after that 2nd round in that fight. He started off very aggressively with the grappling. I think he wanted to maybe get Garry out of there, wanted to submit him early in the fight. He was, really pursuing the takedowns, really going grapple heavy in those first 2 rounds, and wasn't able to get it. Garry did a really good job defending, but basically 3rd round onwards, Grant was basically just walking Garry down, hands down. Didn't really look to grapple at all. The commentators were talking about him playing mind games or whatever, but the fact was, I think that Grant just basically gassed out, right? He wasn't death gassed or anything, but he had slowed down to the point where he really wasn't offering much, in terms of, the grappling or even really anything on the feet as well. And Garry was kind of able to just stay on the outside and, pick at him, work the wrestling a little bit, and more or less just coasted the last 3 rounds, I think. But that said, though, it was a very good performance by Garry. He showed, very good awareness there and, good fight IQ. But I just wanted to, contextualize that just a little bit there. So overall, Garry still a very solid prospect. And he's going up against Darian Weeks, who I actually think isn't too bad of a fighter. He got thrown in short notice against Barberena, but he looked decent there, all things considered. But with Weeks, he's a pretty well-rounded fighter himself. I believe his base is in wrestling. His striking, nothing crazy, pretty rudimentary, throwing a lot of the same stuff over and over, but he does seem to have a bit of power there. Does have a nice front kick that he likes to throw. But by and large, I don't think his striking is all that great. He has shown, he could wrestle a bit. He's pretty heavy on top, pretty strong in the clinch, and has shown pretty good cardio as well. So all in all, I do think that Weeks is a decent fighter. I think he's got potentially a future in the UFC. It'll really depend on who they're matching him up with going forward. He does need a little more seasoning. I know he's got a pretty extensive amateur career, but I do think the rest of his game needs to be polished a little bit more. But taking a look at this matchup, I just kind of feel that Garry's a little bit better everywhere. I think Weeks might be the better wrestler, but everywhere else, I think Garry's kind of got him covered. I do favor Garry a little more on the feet. He's going to be the bigger guy in there. He's going to be taller, have the reach advantage. He's got a very heavy leg kick that I think can give Weeks some trouble. Barberena was kicking the legs of Weeks pretty well, and Weeks was responding pretty poorly to them. And Garry does seem to have a very heavy leg kick. Also, he does a really good job fighting behind that jab, which, he's going to have the reach advantage over against someone like Weeks. And, Weeks, he is a bit plotty. He does have pretty basic striking, honestly, and Garry does seem to move pretty well on the outside as well. As far as the grappling, I've seen a bit more from Garry. He seems to be pretty comfortable on the ground, whereas with Weeks, he has shown he could wrestle a little bit, but he's I don't know, he's not very fluid with the grappling, and he's kind of just pounding out some of these lower level guys. Whereas with, Garry, I've at least seen him defend and get out of some pretty tricky situations against some, solid, regional vets like Grant. So I do favor Garry a little more in the grappling department, and, Weeks, he might have the advantage, in terms of, just pure wrestling, but I don't know if Weeks is going to have too much success there. Garry has shown, pretty good takedown defense, and he has shown pretty good get-ups as well. So I don't know if Weeks is going to be able to consistently take Garry down. I don't know if he's going to be able to hold him down, even if he is able to take him down. Barberena was able to get up a few times against Weeks, and Barberena looked pretty awful against someone like Witt. So if he's able to get up from Weeks, I do think that Garry should be able to get up as well. So I just don't see too many paths to victory here for Weeks. Maybe he's able to catch Garry with something big. But again, I don't think that Weeks is like a phenomenal striker or anything. Jordan Williams was giving Garry a little bit of trouble on the feet standing with the striking, but I think Williams is a much better offensive striker than Weeks. So yeah, I do struggle to see a very clear path to victory here for Weeks. I got to go with Garry. I do actually think it's going to be a pretty competitive fight. I don't know if Gary's going to blow Weeks out of the water here. I think Weeks is actually good enough, defensively, and can offer enough with the wrestling to maybe survive a decision and, have a few moments in the fight. But overall, I do favor Garry here to win the minutes and win a pretty clear decision here. So give me Garry by unanimous decision. Moving along, we have Julio Arce versus Daniel Santos, and Arce's the -200 favorite. Comeback on Santos is +170, and honestly, just not much of a breakdown here because I wasn't able to find any sort of footage on Santos, nothing on YouTube, Nothing on Fight Pass, nothing on MMA Core even. There was one video, but it looked like it got removed, so I have no idea what the Santos guys bring to the table here. I have no idea what he does well, what he doesn't do well. So, I'll just talk about Arce a little bit. He is a striker, a boxer. He's got very quick hands, good counter punching, very good combination striking as well. The guy's got good timing and accuracy. Just overall a very solid boxer in there. He's been in there with some pretty good guys, guys like Ewell, Dawadu, Erosa. He's got a win over Dan Ige as well. And, he's coming off of a knockout loss to Song Yadong. And this is, somewhat concerning considered, it is a pretty quick turnaround here. But, he wasn't out cold or anything, but, he did take some damage. So, a little bit concerning. But I don't know if his chin's like completely shot or anything. And, up until the KO, he actually didn't look too bad, down at 135. So, overall, this is, I think, a pretty easy pass fight because we just have no idea how good Santos is or how bad he is. He could just be a complete scrub in there, but, he could also be a phenom. But, it's tough to say, honestly. I got to side with Arce the vet just by default because the guy, at least, with Arce, he is proven. He has fought some decent guys in the division. He's fought decent guys up a division or up a weight class. So kind of just have to default to Arce here. But outside of that, I really don't have much of a breakdown, unfortunately. If you guys are able to find tape or any footage or even highlights of this Santos guy, feel free to leave a comment below. But as of right now, I got nothing on Santos. So, just going to go with Arce by default. But yeah, probably not going to bet this fight at all. Moving along into the next fight, we have Mike Malott versus Mickey Gall, and Malott's the minus 160 favorite. Come back on. Gall is plus 140. And we'll start with the newcomer in Malott. And so with Malott, pretty limited footage on him. He doesn't fight all that much, and most of his fights do end pretty damn quickly. But from what I have seen, he's a very good athlete in there. The guy's very quick, very strong, extremely explosive with a lot of his movements. I do believe his base is in wrestling. But overall, I feel like he's out there just out-athleting guys. He's able to hurt guys on the feet, but, I've seen him look to just take guys down, pound him out, or just snatch up a submission, and he's able to overpower guys a lot of the time. So I really don't know how good he is, from a technical standpoint, but it does look like the guy's extremely strong and explosive in there. So he is pretty dangerous early in the fight, but, I just don't know if that's really going to translate to the UFC level, when he's going to be going up against guys who are able to kind of match his athleticism, guys who are a little better defensively in there. So it's going to be very interesting to see how he matches up against Gall. And, with Gall, he's a bit of a meme fighter, honestly. His base is in grappling, in jiu-jitsu. And, I did get fooled a little bit into thinking maybe his striking was improving, after his fights with Mike Perry and Jordan Williams. But Perry's on a pretty steep decline. He's no longer with the UFC, and Williams is, I think, out of the UFC as well. But, with Gall, he is definitely a grappler first, even when he was hurting Williams, even when he had Williams hurt. His first instinct was to get the fight to the ground and look for the submission. But, it's been like 6 years now since Gall's been in the UFC, and I really have not seen, significant improvements from him, fight to fight. The guy's still, I think, very much submission or bust. And pre-tape, I was kind of on the Gall side, was tempted to, bet him. But, I did the tape and really just was not impressed. Gall, yes, he is the UFC veteran technically, and he is going up against a guy who's making his debut, a guy who's got a ton of early finishes, a very unproven fighter. So there were some potential angles for betting Gall in this spot, but I just really wasn't sold on Gall at all. Technically he's got UFC wins, but realistically, some of these wins could have happened over at LFA or something, and nobody would have really given a shit. So I really don't know if you could rate those UFC wins really all that well. But taking a look at this matchup, I do think it's a pretty intriguing matchup. Should be a fun one, honestly, but it's hard to get a great read on this fight just because Malott, he's extremely unproven. He does seem like a very strong, explosive fighter, but, I don't think he's really fought anyone of note. He did fight Dawadu back in the day, a few years ago, and, he did get finished in that fight, but that was a long time ago, and since then he hasn't really fought anyone of note. And so there are concerns for how he's going to look when he does get extended. But, on the other hand, Gall, again, does not have the best cardio either, and, if this fight does get extended, I just don't think that Gall's that good to the point that, he could really capitalize. But, Gall, he is a decent grappler in there. And Malott, if he's out there blowing his load early, Gall could potentially capitalize, get a finish later in the fight. But this is, I think, a pretty big stay away fight for me. Pretty high variance. Gall, not a very impressive fighter. Malott, well, he has looked good, very unproven. So, if I had to pick a sider, I think I just got to go with Gall, the guy who's at least fought some decent competition at the UFC level. Whereas with Malott, really no one of note. But yeah, this is a pretty big stay away fight. But if you had to force me to pick a sider, I got to go with Gall. I think that if he's able to survive that first round, it could get a bit dicey. It could get very interesting. So yeah, I got to go with Gall. At least he's gone the distance a few times. So yeah, give me Gall in this spot, but extremely low confidence. And moving along, we have Kelvin Gastelum versus Nassourdine Imavov, and pretty interesting fight here between two strikers. Gastelum on a bit of a skid, Imavov streaking a little bit, but Imavov is going to be the minus 205 favorite. Come back on Gastelum is plus 175, and we'll start with the veteran and the underdog in Gastelum first. So Gastelum, he is a pretty good boxer in there. The guy's got pretty quick hands, good combination punching. He does a pretty good job of just sliding in and out of the pocket. He's got pretty good movement in there, and overall is pretty decent defensively. Just a pretty solid boxer all around. Very tough, very durable, and has shown pretty good cardio as well. He's gone 5 rounds. Did lose all those fights, but he has shown that he could go the distance in a 5-rounder. And he has shown he could wrestle a little bit as well. The guy's definitely hit some offensive takedowns before. It's not a big part of his game, but it is definitely something that's in his arsenal. And the issues with Gastelum, though, is he is pretty inconsistent in there. And of course, he is undersized. But when it comes to the inconsistency, of course, we have the Adesanya fight where he is able to take 2 rounds off of the champ and is able to fight very competitively up until the final round. But then, in the fight right after that, the guy just lays an absolute egg against Darren Till, looks just lethargic in there, and is basically just a big clinch fest the whole fight. The guy looks slow, does not look like he wants to be in there, and ends up dropping a split decision to Till. And then, of course, he fights Hernandez, gets heel hooked in like a minute. But then, he's coming off of a very competitive fight against Cannonier, who, he is able to take a couple rounds off of as well. So, at his best, Gastelum is someone who can fight extremely competitively with some high-level guys in there. He's taken rounds off of guys like Cannonier, who's going to be challenging for the title. Guys like Izzy, who is the current champ. So, that's the thing with Gastelum. Sometimes he could put on some really good performances, but sometimes he could just completely fall flat. And of course, the guy is undersized. He's somewhat undisciplined with his diet. The guy is giving up a lot of size in a lot of his fights, and he's definitely going to be giving up size in this fight as well. Imavov is going to be, I think, the tallest guy that Gastelum's fought since Izzy in there. And Imavov, he's a very sharp striker as well, very accurate, good power, really good, at distance. He fights really well behind the jab. He's got a good front kick as well. And he has shown a somewhat well-rounded game also. I have seen Imavov hit some takedowns, and he does seem to have a pretty sneaky front choke arsenal as well. So that is something that you got to be wary of, with Imavov. But by and large, he is primarily a striker, and, he is pretty dangerous on the feet, very sharp. But taking a look at this matchup, I definitely see some advantages for Imavov at distance. He's going to be the physically bigger guy. He's going to be taller, he's stronger, and he's got the reach advantage, and he's going to be the younger guy as well. So I can definitely see Gastelum having some trouble at distance. We could see those kicks give Gastelum some trouble. But, Gastelum, he is pretty good at covering distance, and he is quick in there. He's undersized, but a lot of the times I do think that he's got a bit of a speed advantage, and he's definitely going to need that if he's looking to close the distance on someone like Imavov. And he's got to be careful because Imavov does have a pretty sneaky jump knee as well, which he's, I think, landed a few times on Heinisch. But overall, I just don't really think this is going to be a complete washout on either end. Gastelum, he's on a pretty rough skid, but, he's really just losing to the best guys in the division because, we just go through his losses real quick. Adesanya, obviously, the champ, very high-level guy. The Till fight was a bad look, honestly. It was just mainly a clinch fest, but, it could have been him, being a bit down on himself after the loss to Izzy. But yeah, not a good look there. Gets subbed early by Hermanson, very high-level grappler. Not sure that Imavov is someone that's going to be able to pull off something like that either. And Whitaker, obviously, the second best guy in the division. So that's a tough fight for Gastelum, not to mention, Gastelum was coming in short notice that fight. And then, of course, Cannonier, very close fight as well. Cannonier about to challenge for the title, most likely. So, he's fighting just top-tier guys in there. And, Imavov, he's a very solid fighter himself, but I just don't think he's quite at that level yet. He could have a bit of potential, but, at the end of the day, Imavov still is very early in his career, whereas, Gastelum, he's fought some very, very good guys in there. Even, before these losses, he's fighting some pretty solid vets in there as well. So I do think it's a somewhat competitive fight. I really don't think that Imavov should be this big of a favorite. He hasn't really proven himself. He's on a 2-fight knockout streak. Very impressive wins over Heinisch and over Shabazian. But Shabazian, the guy's a well-known gasser at this point, decided to engage in the grappling. So very, questionable there, and ended up gassing out, get the TKO, finish second round. And then his win against Heinisch, very impressive. Not going to knock that too much there. But, this is a pretty decent step up in competition in someone like Gastelum. Gastelum is going to be undersized in this fight, but, historically he's always fighting guys who are going to be bigger than him, and he does seem to do a pretty good job of, handling it. And, we did also see with Imavov, he did struggle a bit with guys who've been able to pressure him. Williams was able to take that first round off of him, and, Heinisch was actually having a little bit of success every time he was able to move forward. And, with Gastelum, he is a much higher level boxer, much higher level striker than both of those guys. And I do think that if Gastelum is able to pick the right moments to pressure in this fight, he could have some success. And overall, I just don't think that it's going to be a blowout on Imavov's end. So I kind of like the Gastelum side here. I don't think he's beyond redemption at this point. I do think that he could still get some wins at the UFC level. And, speaking of, I do think that Gastelum's back is a bit up against the wall here. The guy is like 1-5 in his last 6, and he's losing to contenders, but, if he's also losing to up-and-comers as well, I don't think the UFC is going to be keeping him around for long. So I do think that this is kind of a must-win for Gastelum. So I do think he's going to come in with his A game. He might even come in and potentially look to wrestle a little bit, look to cage push also, because we kind of have seen Imavov struggle a little bit with the wrestling, the cage pushing. Obviously, Hawes, I think, is a better wrestler than Gastelum, but, Gastelum, I think when he needed that win against Heinisch, he went to the wrestling. I think that's something he could mix in here. I don't know if he'll have too much success, but I do think that if his boxing is on point, he's able to mix in some of the wrestling. It is going to be enough for him to potentially win a decision here. So I'm going to go back to the well with Gastelum here. His back is up against the wall. I think he really needs this win, and I think he comes with his A game. So give me Gastelum by decision. And moving along, we have Mackenzie Dern versus Tecia Torres. And Torres is the -140 favorite. Comeback on Dern is +120. So we'll start with Dern, the underdog. So I guess we kind of know what she brings to the table here. She's a very high-level grappler and very accredited there. Obviously, she's won in a ton of tournaments and stuff, so on and so forth. But, of course, this is MMA we're talking about, and she still hasn't really rounded out the rest of her game. Obviously, I don't think her wrestling's really that good. She hasn't really shown a way she could reliably, get fights to the ground. Her striking has improved since when she's first started, but by and large, I do think that her striking is still, pretty subpar. She does seem to have, a bit of power, and she will move forward and throw down. She will, look to throw bombs in there, close the distance, but I don't think she's, a phenomenal striker, and I don't think she's a good enough wrestler to consistently have to get fights to the ground. And, so far she's relied extremely heavily on her grappling to win fights, and, she's honestly done well so far, but I also feel it's a function of her opponents having some pretty bad fight IQ as well. Obviously, in her most recent fight, she did lose to Rodriguez. Rodriguez was able to keep the fight standing and just do work for, 4 out of the 5 rounds, honestly, how it should have been in most of her fights. I think a lot of people, me included, thought that, Nina Antarov or even Ronda Marcos would be able to, fight a smart game plan, keep it standing, and just look to outstrike Dern. But for some reason, those fights end up in the ground, and she's able to pull off the submission. But I do feel that Dern is starting to get to a certain level where, she's going to be fighting better opponents who aren't going to be making, boneheaded mistakes in there. And I do think that Torres is a good enough fighter, a veteran level enough fighter to be able to keep it standing and just outstrike Dern. But when it comes to Torres, I do think she's a pretty solid fighter, a bit of a gatekeeper, but not that it's really a knock on her or anything, because she's really only losing to championship quality fighters like Andrade and Joanna and Whaley and Rose, and most recently to Rodriguez, which, Rodriguez is a very high level striker, probably going to get a title shot soon. So, just very, top of the line fighters that Torres is losing to. But, Torres, she's a pretty good striker herself. She's got good volume, good output. She's got good footwork. She's pretty quick in there, very agile. And she has shown she could mix in some of the wrestling as well. But, the big issue with her is just that she's been pretty undersized for the division. She's very strong, very muscular, but in terms of her frame, she is a bit smaller than most of the fighters she's going up against. And, we do see her get bullied a bit in the grappling by bigger, stronger fighters like Whaley and even Andrade. And then we did see her get outstruck by much more technical strikers in Rodriguez and Joanna. But, those fighters also had quite a bit of reach on her as well. So, she was at a pretty big, disadvantage in terms of the size, and then of course, the technical, level as well. But, overall, Torres is, I think, a very, good fighter and has actually fought pretty admirably, all things considered, in those fights. She wasn't actually getting completely blown out. She was actually somewhat holding her own. It wasn't she did lose those fights pretty clearly, but it wasn't an absolute thrashing or anything, if that makes sense. But anyways, I don't know if Dern is quite at that level. Definitely not, in terms of MMA, but, her jiu-jitsu is obviously elite caliber. But again, I just don't know if she's going to be able to consistently get this fight to the ground. Torres does have, pretty good footwork in there. She's got, decent takedown defense and get-ups. And she's never been submitted before, which, of course, if anyone were to submit Torres, it'd probably be Dern. But the fact that she hasn't been submitted so far, I do think is a pretty good sign. And I do think that this is probably somewhat similar to the J.J. Aldrich-Robertson fight, in the sense that, we could potentially see Torres just, play it kind of safe, stay on the outside, and look to just pick Dern apart on the feet, and then, just shuck off takedowns and, stay defensive when she is taken down as well. So, obviously, Dern definitely a much more dangerous submission grappler than someone like Robertson, but, as we saw in the Rodriguez fight, it's not an auto sub if Dern is able to get you to the ground. So I do think that Torres should have good enough defensive grappling to not get submitted if she does somehow get taken down. And honestly, I'm not really even sold on the grappling cardio of Dern. I think she's really only shown one round of solid grappling cardio, and outside of that, she's either been able to get her opponents out of there, or she ends up going to really close fights, really close decisions. Because if you look at the fights that have gone to the decision, obviously the Rodriguez fight where she had one good round, where she was able to get some top control time on Rodriguez, wasn't able to find the sub. But her other decisions are against Verna Jandiroba, very close fight that ended up, playing out on the feet 100%. But that was very close anyways against Verna, who's not really a great striker in my opinion, and is also a bit of a gasser herself. Amanda Ribas, the fight she lost, Ribas having, better cardio, much more well-rounded fighter. And then to Yoder, split decision loss there. So yeah, I'm just not really sold on Dern's minute winning ability, and I'm not really sold on her cardio. So I like Torres here. Obviously, I think the size, it could be a bit of a factor. Dern is a pretty big straw weight, and I do think that, if they do end up in the clinch or something, we could see Dern get some control time. But overall, I do think that Torres is the much more well-rounded fighter. She's the better striker. She's probably got the better cardio, better output, a bit quicker in there as well. So I just have a hard time seeing Dern get takedowns. I have a hard time seeing her get good enough control time to really win this fight. So give me Torres here, and give me Torres by decision. And in the next fight, we have Khamzat Chimaev versus Gilbert Burns, the people's main event. Chimaev is the -600 favorite, comeback on Burns is plus 425. And this is probably the fight that a lot of people are most excited about, even more so than the two title fights on the card. And I completely understand it, because I am as well. Because with Chimaev, he's definitely riding a ton of hype coming into this fight. And, it is tough to kind of give a really unbiased breakdown because there are going to be some very strong opinions on both sides. Some are going to be on the hype train. He's the real deal and everything. And of course, you're going to always have the skeptics who are going to look to fade him, saying he's untested. He's taken a big step up in competition. The cardio is still a bit of a question mark. So a lot of unanswered questions, but I'll try and, look at this from as neutral of a standpoint as I can here. So taking a look at Chimaev, we kind of know the deal with him. The guy's just a freak athlete in there. He's, super explosive. He's a fantastic wrestler. He's very aggressive on top. He's going to hunt the finish. And no one's really been able to really push him or provide much resistance, right? And Chimaev, he is undoubtedly a freak athlete, right? Because you're not running through guys like he is if you don't have some crazy power, some crazy explosiveness. And, on top of all that, the guy is definitely skilled. He's a fantastic wrestler. And he has shown he's got some hands as well. He did knock Mearshart out with one punch. He did land a pretty nasty uppercut over Ikram Aliskerov on the regionals. And, I'd argue that Aliskerov is probably a better win than a couple of his UFC opponents like Reese McKee and probably John Phillips. Because this Aliskerov guy, he does seem pretty solid. And I do think that we may see him in the UFC sometime soon here. But back to Chimaev here. We do know the guy's got a very high floor. We just don't really know where his ceiling's at and how he's going to look should he get extended later in the fight. And I do think Burns is a very interesting opponent for him because, Burns is definitely going to be the most skilled fighter that he's fought to date. Burns, the most experienced fighter as well. I do think that Burns is going to be able to offer much more resistance than, guys like Li Jingliang, who, historically has had a pretty weak, ground game. Guys like Reese McKee, guys like John Phillips, because, Burns, he is a very high level competitor in there. Pretty good athlete himself. He does have a bit of power on the feet. He is quite explosive there. And him training under Hooft all these years, his striking is coming along quite a ways actually. And of course the guy's a very high level submission artist. The guy is a black belt. He does still, I believe, compete. I don't know, how much success he's having there these days, but he still is a very high level submission artist. And so, I do think that Burns could pose some troubles for Chimaev, on the feet and on the ground. But, things to consider are that Burns, he is going to be a bit undersized in this fight. I know he's filled into welterweight pretty well, but he has fought at lightweight a large chunk of his career. There's no way Chimaev's making lightweight, and Burns, he's going to be giving up the height and the reach on someone like Chimaev. Chimaev, he's fought at middleweight, so big size advantage for Chimaev. And at this stage in their career, I do think that Chimaev's the better athlete as well. And so for those reasons, I do think that we could see a first round finish for Chimaev once again, because he's a very high level wrestler and the guy's just a freak athlete in there. So we could just see him take Burns down and just smash him like some of his other opponents. Of course, Burns probably going to be much more defensive about it. He's going to be able to offer much more resistance than guys like Li Jingliang and John Phillips and Reese McKee, but it might not be enough. And I'm not even ruling out a stand and knockout either from Chimaev, because we have seen Burns hurt and wobble before. He has been knocked out, and I don't think Chimaev's some elite striker, but he has shown he's got pretty good timing on the feet, and the explosiveness that he has definitely translates into his striking as well. So we could potentially see Chimaev catch Burns standing. Also, he could pound him out as well on the mat. So a couple paths to victory for Chimaev in that first round. However, I do have to acknowledge that should this fight get into the second round is where it's really going to get interesting, because that's where I think really will get to see how Chimaev is going to look, when he does get extended. If he exerts himself in that first round, how's this cardio going to look come that second round? And, we do have to wonder how spent Burns is going to be, right? Because it's going to take a lot of energy from Burns to survive that first round. He's going to take a lot of damage potentially. So, I'm kind of hoping this fight does go over. I really do want to see how, both guys look when they get extended. My official prediction for this is going to be, Chimaev round one knockout. I actually think he gets it done on the feet. I think he's going to land a clean shot on Burns and put him down. So, yeah, my official pick for this fight, Chimaev round one knockout. But, if I am to make a case for Burns could potentially land a big bomb early in the fight. Burns does have pretty big power, but we just haven't really seen the chin of Chimaev tested. He could be chinny, but he could be pretty damn durable as well. We haven't really seen that from Chimaev, so it's hard to say. The other option for Burns is to maybe drag this fight into deep waters, really look to test the cardio of, Chimaev. But, if you do that, you kind of run the risk of taking a ton of damage early. So I just have a hard time seeing Burns pulling something off here. However, he is a very high-level guy. He's done it for a really long time. He definitely can pull off the upset, but I think in most cases we see Chimaev pull off the W here. So give me Chimaev by round 1 knockout. And in the co-main event, we have the rematch between Petr Yan and Aljamain Sterling. Yan is the minus 450 favorite. Comeback on Sterling is plus 350. And of course, this is a rematch, so we kind of have an idea of how the stylistics of it goes, what both guys bring to the table. But, I'll kind of just go over it real quick for anyone who's unfamiliar. So with Yan, obviously the guy's a real high-level striker. He's very technical. He's got good power, very good composure in there. He's great at really just making reads and adjustments as the fight progresses. The guy definitely is someone who will build as the fight goes. He is, in my opinion, the best striker in the division. I think the Sandhagen fight really settled that. I thought that prior to that, it might be something that was somewhat debatable, but I do think that after that fight, it's pretty clear that, Yan is definitely the best striker in the division. The guy's very patient, very composed, can be a little low output at time, but, he is extremely ferocious when he throws. When he does look to throw, he throws with, very nasty intent in there. And, really the only knock on him is the fact that he does tend to start his fights a little slow, but by and large, the guy's just a very high-level elite fighter in there. And he's going to be going up against Sterling, very well-rounded fighter, but, of course, Sterling does have his base in wrestling and jiu-jitsu. Obviously, his striking has come a long way, but, for the sake of this matchup, he's still, a couple levels behind. He's able to hang with other guys in the division, but, I just don't think that Aljo's striking is going to really be able to cut it, at this level. But just diving into the matchup real quick, we've kind of seen it play out, and I just don't think it plays out too differently. But I guess I will make a small case here for Aljo, kind of play devil's advocate a little bit. I do think Yan wins, but, I feel like everyone's going to be talking about how Yan's going to win. I'll try and see if I could talk Aljo up here a little bit. But, first things first, I do think that Aljo fought a pretty terrible game plan in the first fight. He came in there fighting like he was fighting Munoz, basically. He had very just wild striking in there, very inefficient use of his energy. The guy's shot selection was pretty whack, honestly. That guy was just really throwing stuff against the wall and hoping something stuck. And, that was just, I think, a terrible game plan because Yan, he starts a little slow, but he was very defensive. I don't think too much was getting through. Aljo, he did land, I think, a jump knee a couple of times. But Yan, the guy's crazy durable, has a crazy poker face in there. So I don't know how that really affected Yan. But, by and large, Aljo was just throwing a ton of strikes out there with not a lot of substance. And, that may work for Munoz in a 3-round fight, but, in a 5-rounder against a much more dangerous, a much more technical striker in Yan, that was, I think, a pretty bad idea. But I do think that Aljo, maybe he can make it a little more competitive if he's able to tighten up his striking a little bit. We did see him have a lot of success with the kicks, mainly that front kick. Aljo does have pretty long legs for the division, so you do want to see him attack the go to the kicks a little more since, I don't know if he's going to be hanging with Yan too much, in terms of, just pure striking. But, he could definitely work on his pacing a little bit as well. He was going way too hard in that first round. So I do think that if he's able to tighten it up a little bit, slow it down, he could make it, a little more competitive, especially as the fight progresses, going into the second, third, and even fourth round. That said, though, I do still favor Yan pretty heavily on the feet. And, of course, Aljo, he is a very high-level grappler in there. The guy's actually got a pretty phenomenal back take. He's a very slick submission grappler, but I don't know if he's going to be able to get too much of that going because, he obviously wasn't able to in that first fight. But, again, he did gas himself out pretty hard after that first round and a half. And, after that, he just wasn't really doing anything effectively, even with the strike. So, this is a pretty tough fight for him, honestly. I tried to make a little bit of a case for him, but overall, I do think that it's a pretty tough stylistic matchup for him. Because I think for Aljo to really win here, he's going to have to take Jan down, and I don't think he's going to be able to, with much success. And if he's forced to strike with Jan, then he's going to be in for a really rough night. So stylistically, I think it does favor Jan, but stylistics aside, I mean, you have to look at the circumstances as well. It's not really good for Aljo either, because, during this time off, it's been a bit over a year now. He's had neck surgery, and so, that plus the long layoff in which, he's spent most of that time recovering as well. You have to wonder how much is he really improving, how much of his game he's really, working on. And, at what, like 32 or something? Yeah, he's around that age. He's nearing the tail end of his prime. So I don't know if he's going to be making too many improvements to his game. Whereas with Jan, he's going to be entering his prime, and he's also, fighting during this time as well. He was able to beat a top contender in Sandhagen. So I feel in terms of like just the big picture, we're starting to see like the best version of Jan, whereas with Aljo, we've kind of already maybe seen the best version of him. I highly doubt we see a better version of him coming out of neck surgery, year-long layoff and such. So unless they've injected him with some super soldier serum in addition to that neck surgery, I just have a tough time seeing Aljo having much success in this fight. So the pick for me obviously is going to have to be Jan in this fight. I think he knocks out Aljo this time. I know this will be effectively their 5th and 9th rounds, I guess. They've already gotten 4 rounds in, so Jan will likely have gotten some of his reads in, some of those tendencies he's picked up on from last fight. Jan historically does start a little slow in fights, but I do think that since they fought before, we might not see him start off as slowly. And even then, Jan was able to actually get a knockdown in that first round against Aljo. So I definitely think that's on the table here once again. And realistically, I just don't know what Aljo could do to have much more success, right, in this fight. I don't know if he could change his game plan too much. He's been saying in interviews that, it might have been like something to do with his weight cut, and that it might have been like a cardio issue, which is honestly kind of concerning because, I don't think it was an issue of him, potentially having a bad weight cut and gassing himself out. I think it was just him overexerting himself, early in that fight. And, even if he does have a good weight cut here, I don't think that style is going to be very sustainable, especially in a 5 round or so. I like Jan in this spot. I think that he likely gets the knockout maybe in round 3, maybe round 4, but it kind of does depend on how Aljo decides to approach this as well, right? If he comes in guns blazing like he did before, then I definitely see him knockout materializing sooner than later. But if he's a little more composed in there, fights a little smarter, paces himself a little better, and does a better job of working the wrestling and grappling in, then maybe he is able to survive to a decision, maybe even steal like a round off of Jan. But I do think Jan's going to be able to take it. I think that he's just the much better striker in there. And if you're giving Jan like 5 rounds to really work with on Aljo, I think he's eventually just going to be able to land heavy enough shots to hurt Aljo or potentially get him out of there. So I like Jan in this spot. Give me Jan by round 3 knockout. And in the main event, we have Alexander Volkanovski versus the Korean Zombie, and Volkanovski's the minus 650 favorite. Come back on the Korean Zombie is plus 425. And I do think this is actually going to be a pretty fun fight. Both guys are usually in pretty exciting fights. But we'll take a look at the champ, Volkanovski first. So, Volkanovski, very high-level guy in there, very technical, very well-rounded. He's very good on the feet, very good with the distance management. He's got, really good feints, good head movement. He's got great footwork and good counterpunching as well. Overall, is just a very good defensive fighter. Also, he does a really good job of mixing it up. He knows when to really sit down on his shots, when to really go light on him. So the guy's just a very high-level, very technical fighter. And, of course, he does have good wrestling as well. He's shown that he can mix it in at opportune times to really look to win minutes. And Volk just really has a really good sense of knowing what to do, when to do it in a fight. I mean, the guy is just really good at controlling where the fight goes, controlling the fight optics. I mean, he knows what the judges are looking for, and he's able to just execute a game plan at a very high level. And on top of that, the guy's got crazy good cardio. He's super tough in there. He got hurt by Mendez, got dropped, was able to come back from that. He did get wobbled a couple times by Max in their second fight and was able to fight back from that. Regardless of how you scored the fight, he was able to keep it very competitive after those first 2 rounds where he got hurt. And he showed in the Ortega fight, you could put him in a very bad spot and he's able to come back from that. So the guy's just got next level durability, heart, and cardio. And it's good that he does, because he's going to be going up against Korean Zombie, who he's got very good power, very good timing in his counterpunching. And, with Zombie, he is actually a pretty well-rounded fighter. He's shown that, he could wrestle a bit, as we saw in his most recent fight against Ige. The guy's a very slick submission grappler as well, but more often than not, he is content to stand in front of opponents and just trade with them. The guy historically has had pretty good durability. I know it's starting to go a little bit now, but historically he is someone who will stand in front of you, stand in the pocket, and just trade. His head movement and footwork, not really there. He's kind of just there to bait opponents into trading with him, where he could just land some heavy counters. And his style kind of revolves around that. His nickname is the Korean Zombie, so that generally is what he's looking to do. But of course, he does have a pretty well-rounded skill set to back it up as well. But taking a look at this matchup, you definitely have to favor Volkanovski here. I think the guy's just such a good technician in there that he's going to be winning a lot of the minutes. Zombie, he's going to be landing some heavy shots in there, but overall, I do favor Volk to be winning a majority of the minutes. He's very good at, working the leg kicks, very good at just staying busy, staying on the outside, pumping out the jab, and mixing in the wrestling at opportune times to cap off rounds. And on top of that, I do think that Volk is very good defensively as well. The guy is constantly moving in there. You look at his fights with Holloway, and Holloway is able to land 100-something significant strikes against Volkanovski, but you look at what Holloway is able to do against some of these other guys who aren't as good defensively in there, and you realize just how good Volk actually is. And in both of those fights, we actually see Volk outland Holloway, and we see Holloway as just output machine. And Volk was not only able to kind of mitigate a lot of the damage coming from Holloway, but he was able to match him in the pace and the output as well. So yeah, I do really like Volkanovski in this spot here. I really like his ability to really control where the fight goes. He's really good at kind of dictating, how the fight happens. And on top of that, he's just shown really good durability and heart. He's been hurt. He's come back from being hurt before. And, Zombie, he could definitely hurt Volkanovski here. Zombie is still a very dangerous striker. And Cejudo, who's coaching Zombie right now, I think for this camp, mentioned something pretty interesting in an interview. They're talking about how they're preparing for Volkanovski here, and they kind of acknowledge that they're probably not going to be winning minutes, and they're really just focusing on trying to maximize Zombie's win condition. Look for, or really, stress what he does best, and that's landing that big shot on him. He didn't specifically say how they're going to do that. Obviously, don't want to give too much away, but it's good, I guess, in the sense that they're being real. They're being realistic about what Zombie's win condition is, and they're looking to maximize the window for that opportunity. But honestly, what that kind of sounded like to me was that he's saying Zombie's basically got a puncher's chance in this fight, and I don't think it's meant to be like disrespectful, and I'm definitely not saying that in a disrespectful way, because I think a lot of the time people hear puncher's chance and they're kind of saying he's gonna have to get lucky, but I don't think so. When it comes to these guys who are fighting at the highest level, 4-ounce gloves, a puncher's chance can be very real in a lot of scenarios. And I do think that, a puncher's chance for Zombie is still a very live outcome here. But at the end of the day, I just don't know if it's going to happen in this fight, because, maybe we see Zombie land something big, but we haven't seen Volkanovski actually knocked out before. He's shown a very good chin. He's shown really good recoverability, and he's shown that he could come back, after getting rocked, after being put in a very bad situation. So, even if Zombie is able to land something big on Volk, I just don't know if it's a guaranteed that he'll get him out of there. And it's been a couple of years since Zombie's knocked anyone out. Most recently against Edgar, who historically has been, pretty durable, but I believe at the time that's when Edgar's finish streak was starting to kick up. I believe that was his second finish in his career. And since then, we've only seen his durability diminish. And then before that was against Moicano, who, Moicano does tend to get a little sloppy in the pocket. So what I guess I'm trying to say here is, I don't know if Volkanovski is going to have the same concerns here. And also, I do want to say, the Korean Zombie, he's starting to get a bit of wear and tear on his body. And I believe he's had a couple of shoulder surgeries already. He is getting a little up there in age. I know he's only about 1.5 or 2 years older than Volk, but in terms of like just fight miles and everything, he's suffered a lot more wear and tear. So maybe he might not have as much pop in his shots. Maybe his timing and his reactions won't be as sharp, so it might not be as thunderous of an impact. But with all that said, I'm definitely not trying to disrespect the power of Zombie or overlook it. In fact, I do think that we actually see Zombie land a big shot here, potentially. I think we see a potential 10-8 round for Zombie. I think he's going to be able to land a pretty clean shot on Volkanovski, have him in a bit of trouble, but I think we see the toughness and the grit and the heart of Volkanovski prevail. So official pick for me in this fight is going to be Volk by decision, probably 48-46, I want to say. I think, if he drops that 10-8 round, I think that's what the scorecards are going to look like. So, give me Volk, likely by decision here. But one last thing I will say, I think the likely outcome is Volk by decision, but I'm not going to completely rule out the knockout here. Volk, he has stated on numerous occasions, he does want that knockout. He does want that recognition. He wants a bit of respect, because he's been more or less known as a bit of a decisionator. He does have a few knockout wins in his UFC run, but none in his title defenses. And, he's made a good point in some of his interviews. You look at the guys he's faced, since he's become champ, Holloway twice, Holloway super tough. No one's finishing that guy. And Ortega, super tough guy as well. And for what it's worth, it probably could have or should have been a stoppage in that fight. I mean, they literally had to peel Ortega off the canvas after that third round. And there definitely were some policy or rule violations in that fight as well. Herb gave Ortega way more time than he should have to recover. Ortega couldn't even answer a yes or no question. And it probably should have been stopped, that fight, but they let him keep fighting on for 2 extra rounds, take a little extra damage. But Volk probably feels like he was robbed of a finish there, so he's itching for one, and I do think he's due for one. And with how hittable Zombie is, I do think that Volk is going to be landing some pretty big shots on him. Volk does have a pretty big overhand right that he likes to throw, and knowing Volk in his camp, they really do like to tape study. They're probably going to be looking for openings. They're probably drilling 100 different ways they could throw spinning attacks against Zombie. So I think the likely outcome is a decision, but, I'm not going to rule out the knockout here. And, if it's like plus 400, plus 500 or something, I might put a little bit on the knockout prop for Volk as well. So official prediction for this fight, Volk by decision, but again, knockout is in the cards. I'm probably going to look to parlay Volk. It's likely going to be the and still parlay with Jan and Volkanovski. Still going to be pretty chalky. I think I put it together on a couple books, and it's still like minus 200. So pretty chalky parlay, but I don't see their opponents having too big of a path to victory here. Like realistically, there's probably maybe a 20% chance that either one of them wins. Like maybe an 18% chance that Volk or that Zombie lands, a knockout blow, and maybe a 2% chance that Jan illegally knees Sterling in the face again or something crazy like that. So yeah, I do like Jan. I do like Volkanovski to win here at a pretty high clip. Debating whether or not I want to add a third leg, someone in the minus 200 range that I think is pretty likely to win, get about evens on a parlay like that. But I think the safe play is probably Volk and Jan. I haven't decided yet, but I probably will in the next few days because these lines are probably going to get hit pretty hard and would like to jump in sooner rather than later. But official pick for me in this fight is going to be Volkanovski, likely by decision, but not really ruling out the knockout here. So give me Volk in the spot. And that'll do it for this episode of the podcast. Thank you guys for tuning in. We just broke down the full card for UFC 273. Obviously, we still have a couple weeks to go for this card. Hopefully nothing changes up too much, not too many more pullouts, but I do recommend that you guys still do the tape a little early because this is a massive card, and I have a feeling a lot of these lines are going to get steamed. So better to get in early before the public starts steaming these lines. The parlays are going to start going up, and we're going to see some big numbers by the time fight time rolls around. Anyways, I appreciate all the support, guys. This channel's really starting to pick up a little bit here. We're breaking all sorts of podcast records for the views and the subs and the likes and everything. So really appreciate that. Keep it up, guys. And hopefully you're finding some of these insights useful, some of this information useful in aiding you make some good bets out there. So great card. Really looking forward to it. Hopefully we could cash some of these bets. And I'll catch you guys in a couple of weeks.